Hi, this is the voice of Heidie Calero with another relevant and very much up-to-date topic, which is the national debt dilemma in the U.S., which is impacting not only the U.S., but all the financial markets worldwide. We have really a challenging situation regarding economic growth, whether there's going to be a recession, what's going to happen with financial markets. Is the debt of the U.S. Going to be downgraded as it occurred back in August of 2011? All these topics are going to be relevant in this economic capsule. The first graph that I'm depicting for you is the U.S. debt. That's the one held by the public, is bigger than the economy. And what you're seeing there is in 1990, the public held $2.4 trillion. Trillion, not billion. $trillion. It has lots of zeros to the right. That the public held for the public debt of Puerto Rico, of the U.S., and that accounted for 40.5% back in 1990 of GDP of the U.S. Well, coming along in 2011, when the S&P downgraded the credit rating of the U.S. from AAA, which is outstanding, to AA, which is excellent. Nonetheless, it was still a downgrade. It was the first time that it occurred. The debt held by persons was $10 trillion, and it accounted for 64% of gross domestic product in the U.S. In 2023, we are now, the public holds $25.7 trillion. Yes, that's more than double what it had in August of 2011, and that accounts for almost 100% of the U.S. gross domestic product. The Congressional Budget Office has made recently, in its most budget outlooks through 2033, has made forecasts, and they indicate that if this continues, the trend continues, it's going to be by 2033, it's going to be $46.4 trillion that that persons will hold of that public debt of the U.S., and that accounts for 151.1% of gross domestic product. Well, the parallelism with Puerto Rico as a territory is immense. We were told, Puerto Rico said back in 2015 it could not pay its public debt. So Congress mandated in June 30th of 2016 a PROMESA law, which mandates a 7-member board that really oversees Puerto Rico in terms of restoring fiscal discipline, going back to the markets, and really having economic stability. Well, I'm sure the Congress is not going to be legislating for an oversight board for the U.S., but they must come to terms in terms of this debt ceiling, which is impacting not only the U.S., but it's also impacting all financial markets, and there is that specter of what happened in 2011. The second graph, which is the counterpart, not only the cumulative public debt, but also the fiscal deficit. In the States, it has worsened, and that is expenses are running ahead of revenues, especially after the tax cuts that President Trump legislated back in 2017-18. Well, notice here, since 1990, it was $0.2 trillion, the deficit, and it accounted for 3.7% of the GDP, of the gross domestic product. In 2011, when S&P downgraded the credit of the U.S. in terms of its bonds, U.S. Treasuries, it was negative 8.3%, and the deficit was negative $1.3 trillion. All that red ink that you see there are all the deficits, and in 2023, we have negative $1.4 trillion in deficit. With the pandemic, it was negative $3.4 trillion. It has improved, but it's still negative $1.4 trillion. Very similar to what happened in August of 2011, and that represents negative 5.3% of gross domestic product. As of 2033, forecast by CBO says that it could be as much as negative 6.9% of gross domestic product and negative $2.7 trillion deficit. That is not sustainable. Something has to give. Either we are going to be cutting spending, we are going to increase taxes, or a combination of both. But the U.S. cannot continue in its spending spree as it happens. Where does the federal spending go in 2023? Well, this next bar shows mandatory spending, which are in the green shaded, which is Social Security with $1.3 trillion, Medicare with $0.8 trillion, Medicaid $0.7 trillion, which Puerto Rico is the one that is financing its healthcare reform plan, and other expenses, which is $1 trillion. And then the discretionary, that's where maybe some of the cuts can come. It's very difficult with the entitlements as mandatory spending. Well, that defense spending, $0.8 trillion, and in non-defense it's $0.9 trillion. And then the interest on the debt, which is expected to rise if the United States continues in this debt ceiling that they do not reach an agreement, well, it could increase even further, because then there is going to be more of a risk that the United States may not be paying all of its debt if it comes to that. We hope it doesn't happen, but at any rate, right now it's paying $0.6 trillion in interest, or 2.4% of gross domestic product. How did the financial markets react? Well, let's take the parallelism. On the left-hand side in this graph, it's the S&P index back in December 2010 through December of 2011. The downgrade came in August of 2011. Notice that deepening, that deep dive that occurred in the financial markets, not only in the US, but worldwide. It was a FTSE, it was in the UK, it was in Germany, it was in Japan. It was all over that it started declining, because all the financial markets reacted to this downgrade of the credit rating of the US. And now let's look at the graph on the right-hand side, which is again the same S&P, and what has been happening since January of 2023 through May 23 of 2023. And you can see that there was a dive back in March, and then it started recovering because of all these interest rates of Federal Reserve policy. Then markets sort of stabilizing, but now you see this dip that happened. Because the agreement has not been reached regarding that debt ceiling. And we have a very polarized Republican Congress versus Democratic Congress, and a White House president that belongs to the Democratic Party. So definitely, what are some of the consequences? Well, back in 2011, the US dollar weakened, and it just happened to be, it lost 10.9%. As of 2023, well, right now we've seen where that dip is negative 7.4%, and that means that imports will be more expensive. So if you're going to fuel inflation, it's going to happen. And in Puerto Rico, we import most of what we consume, except maybe for some services. So that expect that inflation not to be rescinding anytime soon if that happens, if there is a weakening of the dollar. And again, all these discussion of China saying, which is the largest creditor of the public debt of the U.S., they're saying, well, maybe we should, sidestep the U.S. dollar as a foreign reserve currency. It was a world reserve currency. Let's continue with our efforts to have the China currency as the reserve currency, at least in the Pacific Basin, and that is certainly happening at this point in time. Let's hope that it really is contained, but certainly it's a risk. It's going to be reductions in some of the discretionary spending for Puerto Rico. That means that some of the spending of Puerto Rico has not been really being very proactive in using many of these funds for the reconstruction after Hurricane Maria and the earthquakes and after COVID. Well, maybe some of those monies may go now to WAM or to reduce for Congress. Some of those Medicaid spending as well, food stamps, all those federal funds may be in peril, because the territories are not as important as in the states, and the states also will be feeling the brunt. So if you liked our capsule, don't forget to subscribe to the Voice of Heidie Calero in YouTube. Send us some topics and comments on topics that you're interested in, and I will try to implement them in our economic capsules. Don't forget to give us a like in those capsules that you really enjoyed. And this is a service of Puerto Rico Economic Pulse. Don't forget, the economy is all of us. Thank you.